This week on the Exploring podcast, we sit down with Benjamin Hauer, otherwise known as Thing on Its Own, the lead developer of Heroes Hour, a Hero Might and Magic homage, and a game I think a lot of you guys are going to want to check out after this interview, so stay tuned.
And now for an Exploring interview. Stay tuned.
Hello and welcome to the Exploring podcast. I am your host, Rob, and joining me today is my co-host, Shaun. Welcome, Shaun.
Good morning, Rob. How's it going?
It's going well. I appreciate you getting up super early to be here, man. What's the time there?
It's about 5:15 in the morning at the moment. So not super early, but yeah, it's all good.
It's early enough. I'm sure most people don't even get up that early. So thank you for being here. And joining us today, we're going to have a special guest with us. It's another Benjamin, and he is the man behind the game Heroes Hour, which is a game I'm going to let him explain to you. Welcome. Hello.
Welcome. Thank you.
So Heroes Hour is a game that I've actually been playing on our YouTube channel, and I think it's starting to pick up quite a bit of steam here in this like indie world, kind of the strategy gaming circles. It's starting to, catch a lot of people's interest. And I want you to tell me a little bit about, if you could, in your own words, explain to me what Heroes Hour is.
Oh, wow. Well, Heroes Hour is, I keep calling it a strategy RPG. I don't really know if that's a real genre name or not, but to explain it a bit better, I guess a lot of your viewers are going to be very familiar with a franchise known as Heroes Might and Magic. And Heroes Hour is sort of my love letter to this game that has followed me throughout my childhood and into my adolescence too. And trying to take it in a new direction because as an adult, I just don't have time for that kind of game. So I spice it up with some things like real-time battles, a more streamlined economy that goes a bit faster. And I guess that's Heroes Hour. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good explanation, actually. And for me, in my own words, I'd say Heroes Hour is, as you'd say, a love letter to the Heroes in Might and Magic series. But it's in a beautiful pixel art style that I think that just really kind of harkens back to the old days, but it's so colorful and vibrant that it just, it makes you love it. So I really like that about the game. And I think that also helps you too, because I think are you doing most of the pixel art?
I actually got the whole start of the project was when I discovered an artist that was doing the exact style that the game is now using. And I'm still working with that artist, though at this point I'm more and more starting to go into making most of the art myself. There's also a third artist, but it's really centered around the original art style developed by the artist known as I Know King Rabbit or Krill, or Alexander Makarov. He actually has a human name too. And I'm really happy that I've been able to join his vision of how this game could look in a very retro state, and still taking the Heroes Hour, I'm sorry to call it that, but that art style to take it to new levels, new heights from where it started. So as mentioned, I'm going into making more and more of the art myself, but it's always in the walking in the footsteps that Alexander started out with.
I didn't know you had three artists because the art style does feel it feels congruent. Right? I just didn't know. I wouldn't have known if you hadn't told me. So that's great stuff.
And there's even a fourth artist, to be honest, but it's just artists all around. But it's all about a lot of people I've met throughout making the game that then have joined up and become part of it too. Yeah.
And as we're speaking here on Discord, his avatar on Discord is an actual GIF. So as he talks, the hand that I guess it's representing is waving in some cool spell power, and it's just super cool. I mean, that's something I've never seen before. That's super cool.
It looks super odd. The first time I noticed it, I was honestly frightened. I hadn't expected that to be a thing, but yeah, you should totally go and make a animated Discord avatar.
That's definitely what I'm doing. That's great stuff. Well, so Benjamin, tell me, how did you get into game design, or game development, I should say? I mean, do you have a history in private development, or did you always sort of do this as a hobby?
I mean, it's always been a hobby, yeah. I've been doing it since I was a kiddo, and more seriously throughout the years, I guess. I guess the best story I can tell is that the name Thing and Zone that I'm using right now, it actually used to be a blog that I was writing. and it was a blog centered around procedural generation. It's still floating around there up on the interwebs. It's not particularly popular, but it has some good write-ups of different ways to do procedural generation. And if I were to actually describe what I am good at as a programmer, a developer, it would actually be procedural generation, even though it ends up being quite a niche thing in a game like Heroes Hour. It's still quite central to the way that I approach things.
Wow, so I think you're probably the first person I've ever spoken to that has like this, I guess, focus on procedural generation. Because, I mean, A, I didn't know that was something you could focus on, but B, it's really central to a lot of the kind of games that I personally enjoy. I really like, especially strategy games that have like procedurally generated maps. So yeah, tell me more. Exactly what goes into learning how to procedurally generate stuff?
It's a very difficult question to answer. Like, I started out just stalking the Reddit for procedural generation, and you see a lot of different methods being thrown around. And I'll be honest, when it comes to doing procedural generation, it really is about being pragmatic. Theories and deep understandings are fine, but honestly, you should just focus on, okay, I want to make this thing. What kind of method can I do? What kind of combination of weird things that honestly shouldn't touch each other at all can I use to create something that works? It's at least the way I use procedural generation. It's very much so goal focused. So, for instance, for Heroes Hour, all the maps that you play on usually are procedurally generated, and the way that I do those maps is very different from how other people who are making maps with procedural generation do it. Like, they might start out with like terrain contours, like mountains go here and waters go here, and they would use Perlin noise for that, for instance. But that just doesn't work when the thing that you're trying to make is a game that people play with these very strict rules for how you move the different directions and such. So for Heroes Hour, I had to think a completely different way to generate a map so that it would actually be interesting to play with. Like, it wouldn't work out to procedural generate a map that looks very realistic, but you start out on an island that only has a single mine, while your opponent has a lot of things. So that's, for instance. So it's really about the kind of thing you want to accomplish and to think creatively with the few tools you have. You don't need to understand everything in depth. You just need to know the problem you're trying to solve, and just think about it until you get the idea that actually works. Then implement it, then find out it doesn't work, and then continue from there.
I bet you it's an iterative process, right? Like, you're just trying to...
Right.
Yeah, that's great. Well, so let's go back to like your idea, right? So you decided that you've always really enjoyed the Heroes of Might and Magic series, but you don't have the time for some of the things that, maybe were part of the gameplay mechanics. And so I noticed you have streamlined some of what's going on here, particularly the battles. So can you tell me a little bit about what made you decide to go with the auto battle system?
I mean, there's two different stories to tell there. Like, the first very naive story is just to say that back when I was a kid, playing Heroes of Might and Magic, I always wanted to see the whole army. Like, instead of having one unit with this number 20 underneath it, I wanted to see all 20 units. I wanted to see the whole thing. So that's the one part of the idea of how I arrived to auto battles. But quite obviously, if you can actually just do that. You can just have lots of units on the battlefield instead of fewer. It's just going to make everything more complex, more complicated. It take longer time to move all the units around. So the whole idea about auto battles is kind of stemming from a very different thing. It's stemming from several different prototypes of games I was making throughout the last 3-4 years. I think the first one was a sort of Pokemon-inspired thing where I wanted to do some sort of combat like that, but as an auto battler. And then I did a different project that had a different take on the whole auto battle formula. And then finally, Heroes Hour was the third take on this whole, let's try to make an auto battler that's interesting. And then also within this whole procedural generated adventure maps thing. And that seemed to work out. So it's half this idea as a kid, I want to see everything play out, and it's half the result of successive iterations upon this game idea for an auto battler. The strangest thing is that since making Heroes Hour, I have seen a lot of people reviewing the game, etc. And I wasn't actually aware of there being a genre of game called auto battler before I started. It's actually something that kind of snuck up on me, and then suddenly I realized, oh, this is the thing I've made, and I hadn't even known that was the thing I was making. But now it's so obvious, yeah, it was an auto battler all along.
Yeah, I mean, I bet you that was a bit of a shock to be like, yeah, I think I'm doing something new here. Oh wait, there's an actual genre here that I'm just kind of keying into. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really great because I think that for me, I'm with you. I enjoy kind of letting things like I enjoy being more of a battlefield general instead of a tactician. So I like kind of like in what you do with Heroes Hour is that you set your armies like each unit type, you can put them in different places on the map so that if you have your melee units, they're closer in, and you have your ranged units, they get sent farther back, and then you are also able to manipulate the battlefield by throwing spells down, and when you go do that, it pauses the battle, which I really like. So that was a really cool system. What made you come up with that?
Apart from throwing spells into the battlefield, you can also make movement orders. Like you can actually choose to move different groups of units around. It's not a particularly used feature for people who are like getting into the game, but within the competitive scene, there's actually a lot of movement orders being thrown around, which I'm kind of startled by. It was never really the idea to do this hybrid between auto battler and having control of the battle. When I started the game, it was very strict on the whole. So you go into combat happens, you leave combat. And the whole game was based around the idea that when you go into combat, you can't play the combat perfectly. It's going to move automatically, so you're going to lose some units. But then I started playing the game with my brother, and he was like, yes, this is cool, but I want to place the units. I want to control the units. And that's kind of what slowly has forced me to give more and more control of the battle to the player, including the spell book where you actually get time to think, including giving movement orders, including putting down the units on the battlefield to start with, like where they go, and also the whole reinforcement system. All of those things were not actually part of the original idea, but kind of things that were invented because of the feedback from people who are playing the game.
Yeah, so in the time that I've spent with it, one of the things that I found really, really interesting was the chaos that could be caused in the battles, because you have the units, they have all these abilities. You can knock everybody around and hit people with lightning, and then you've got all these different units like the Midas unit that can turn other enemies or themselves into gold. And just wanted to ask, how hard was it to come up with all that stuff? Because it seems like there's a lot of random elements that can be introduced into combat.
I actually don't think coming up with all the ideas was the difficult part. Sometimes the more difficult part was to keep myself back from just implementing more and more things. It's quite interesting. You can have some of these mechanics that are very specifically designed, like, for instance, how poison works. Like, you design every single part of it, and then there's other functions that are way more, I wouldn't call it procedural as such, but it's kind of out of your control. For instance, when I implemented spells giving knockback effects to the units you cast them on, the idea really was just to say, oh, you actually you need to get the feeling that the spell is impactful. But then I realized you could also use the knockback effect to actually throw the units around. Or, for instance, if you're doing a siege, you can actually throw a fireball into the castle of the enemy and throw out some of the units above the wall, flying over and landing into your melee unit standing on the other side of the wall. Like, those kinds of abilities were never really something I thought up. It's something that happened instead. And I think those are the abilities that work really well. The ones that are very open-ended and actually lead to these mechanics that weren't there originally. So it's very easy to make up a lot of ideas for things. The difficult part is to make sure you only keep the things that are actually impactful enough for people to notice them within the chaos of the battlefield, and also open enough that people can create strange synergies between the different effects. For instance, you mentioned the Midas touch ability, which is basically a low chance to instant kill any enemy. I've seen players who are specifically using this ability to kill the enemy hero. If the enemy player is putting a lot of points into combat and health for the hero, they'll just send in their Midas touch units specifically to target the enemy hero, even though Midas touch was really more thought of as some sort of, oh, this looks cool, and it's also going to give you some gold after combat. That there's also the openness for it to be used in a very strategic way that wasn't originally planned. It's just that's kind of the crux of a good design.
Yeah, I'll have to echo Shaun's sentiment. I generally, for me, I guess I'm just old and crotchety at this point. So there's two things that I think Heroes Hour does well to keep me entertained, and that, yes, the mayhem of combat. It's so exciting. It's like, there's been so many times, like where you mentioned, fireballs flinging units across the castle walls, and there's been times where I've been in combat and things are just kind of so hectic and crazy that it's just entertaining. Really, it's just like one thing's doing this, and like next thing you know, you see enemies flying, and there's lightning striking across the. It's really entertaining to watch. And second of all, they're over pretty quickly, and for me, again, I guess I'm just at a point in my life where I don't like to be taken away from like the strategy level of a game and a type of game like this. So I don't really like, I don't like combat to take forever. And I think that Heroes Hour has met that real fine balance between, taking enough time that I feel like it's entertaining and also impactful, but also not taking so much time where I feel like I'm being drawn away from the strategy field for too long.
I'm very glad to hear that's exactly the balance I was trying to strive for. I think it's a common thing. Like when you're getting into these years, you're starting to understand that sometimes games take a lot of time in a good way, and sometimes they take a lot of time in a way where you afterwards are thinking, wonder where that time went.
Agreed. I understand that completely. So right now, I know that there's a lot of them, but how many factions does Heroes Hour have?
It has 10 different factions. It's kind of the fault of coming from trying to make a game that's it's an improvement on a game that was already so content rich when it came to having factions. And then at some point I just became really happy with the whole thing of adding factions. So at this point you have all the normal ones. You have humans, you have goblins, you have elves, etc. But there's also a few unique ones. Even currently there's 10 that are playable in the game, but there's also an extra faction that's only playable on my computer for no one else, and it's going to be available for people eventually, which is a Qin Dynasty inspired faction, which is really exciting. And finally, for the 12th faction, just because we need to get on into these kinds of numbers that are completely absurd, I'm doing some community design where I'm making a lot of ideas and then making people vote for which ones are going to be chosen. So we're also going to have a 12th community design faction, though that's probably going to be something that's added post-release.
Right. Now, you've mentioned that there was a competitive scene as well. Is that intended to be like a primary game mode? Like how is that going to work?
It's difficult because, how to put this? Okay, so you know how it goes within the games, that sometimes a developer goes out and says, hey, we're going to be making multiplayer, and then they disappear for like a year or something like that, because that's just the kind of time it takes to implement multiplayer in a game. For that reason, Heroes Hour currently works quite fine as a single-player game. It even has multiplayer, just not real multiplayer. It has local multiplayer. It has hot seat mode, which is quite fine for PvP if you're playing between friends. You can have a laugh, but it's not really... The games tend to stretch on quite long, just because you're two people playing. And I do not think that that's really viable as a primary mode for the game. I think it's more like an auxiliary thing. Like you have the Heroes Hour experience as a central thing. And then there's some people who are going to go into making custom content for the game. There's some people who are going to go into trying to perfect how to speedrun the game, let's say. And there's some people who are going to be focusing on the competitive multiplayer. But it can't really be the central thing, just because I could not see myself putting off 4 hours in my day to sit down and play a game. And if I can't ask myself to take that long, I can't ask my player base to take that long either.
Yeah, that's absolutely fair. I wouldn't be able to do that either. Now, you mentioned custom content. So is there going to be modding available in this as well?
Oh, yeah, for certain. That's actually one of the things I'm working on right now. Like, the game is in a weird phase between it's sort of released, but it's not released on Steam yet. And one of the things I'm working on in this area is modding. What's it called? Modding implementation, modding support. Throughout Christmas, I was working on implementing faction modding. So now you can even add new factions to the game if 10 wasn't enough already. So you can add units to the game, you can add heroes, you can add factions, and it's actually quite easy. Also some extra types of modding, but those are the most important ones, I think. There's a really cool mod out now, which is an ant-based faction. I love the concept of it, that some user decided, like, ants are wonderful creatures, but just to design a whole full faction around it. Like, I'd never do that as a developer, because I have to think about, what's really something that's wide enough for people to have a wide appeal to it. So seeing someone focus in on making an ant faction, one of the more strangely requested factions within the community throughout the time, like not just by one user, but by several users, it's just wonderful. It's quite a great faction too. And I'm amazed at how this artist is able to make ants appealing as pixel art creatures, and also varied enough for there to be 8 different ant species, all of which are, ants, basically the same shape. I'm really excited about that. It's called the Colony mod. It's super duper cool.
You keep speaking about your community, and I'm curious, where are you guys located? Are you on Discord? Do you have a forum?
I think Discord is the primary one for certain. I also have some Twitter. There's technically a Reddit. I honestly have not been able to keep up with the itch.io page. So yeah, the community is on the Discord. It's quite large. It's quite lively, with forums for all the different kinds of creators, like the ones that are interested in the tournament and the ones that are interested in the modding scene. And also people that are just interested in hanging out, of course.
That's awesome. Yeah, and so you mentioned too this like weird kind of status you're in right now where you have a game that's on itch.io that you're still actively developing on and updating. In fact, I believe you said that you'll have an update sometime this weekend with some more of the city art. Is that what I understand?
Oh, yeah, that's quite correct. Like, so the first time I heard of you, Exterminate People, was, of course, back when I think it was in July, when I was doing the version 1 release. And I really thought back then that this was it. This was when the game was just done and finished, and I could take a well-deserved break. And instead, right now, I'm looking at releasing version 1.9 this weekend. There's a pre-release up currently, so it's kind of there, collecting some bugs perhaps before going up to the full release. And then we're looking towards a end of winter full release on Steam. The thing that I'm calling version 2.0, just because it's kind of, the game has technically already been released, but this is quite a big release. So much has happened since the release back in July that it basically makes sense to give it a whole new major number.
From what I've seen, and maybe you can help me kind of fill in the gap. So back to where I was going actually. So you've released the game on itch.io, and then from my understanding, you've also picked up a publisher too, right? Going into the Steam release.
Yes, I'm collaborating with the Goblin Set people. They're mostly handling. Well, I guess that's kind of obvious, them being the publishers. They're mostly handling marketing and also localizations. Probably also they're the ones that I'm going to be cooperating with when it comes to releases on other platforms than PC. Because seriously, I don't know how to do those things. I don't even have any other console than a computer in my available. So yeah, they've joined the family, so to say. Or maybe I've joined the family. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, there you go. So with that though, if we consider 1.0 the version that came out in July and then everything you've done since then, I mean, can you kind of, would you mind giving us kind of like a summary of what you've improved? Because I know there's been a lot. I've kept tabs on your development cycle and how well you've improved Heroes Hour, but would you mind kind of giving us a summary on what you've been doing?
I wonder how best to do it. Like the big taglines is that I've added 2 new factions since then, and I also I wish I remembered, like 25 new hero skills, more than 100 new units, all the different kinds of modding support, including map maker, including factions, heroes, units. Combat sound effects weren't even a thing back in the V1.0 days. Quite a lot of things have changed, and most of them for the better. Other things that have changed is just the thing that happened when I released version 1, and I was like, now's the time to take a break, is that I sat down and was like, I know what I want to add. And I started working on adding, the second part of the map as I thought of it back then, which was the seas, islands, portals, more things to explore across the map. And it's kind of faded since then, because at this point it's old hat, but it's actually quite a large change that happened. It also made the game quite unstable for a while. These things happen. But it's also I'm just reminded of a time when I was sitting around, I wasn't thinking too much about Heroes Hour because everything was kind of at a lull. And I received a message from someone who says that they really enjoyed playing gigantic maps, and they were actually wondering if they could play a map where there wasn't even an enemy AI, just because they really loved the whole thing of exploring the map and seeing where everything was. So I guess in one way, actually going deep enough with the procedural generated maps that are actually interesting was also something that was accomplished.
Well, I thought I'd explored most of the abilities and stuff, but apparently I'm not even close. Just going back to a little bit with what you were saying about the publisher, they were talking about different platforms. Do you think this might ever release on something apart from PC? Because it might actually work, because you're not controlling them that much during combat, and they're like, it might actually work on other like consoles and stuff.
I can't say too much. I literally have a contract on my table that's about that, but it's something that is quite realistic. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah, fair enough.
So moving into version 2.0. So right now with 1.9, I know you've made some, you've continued to iterate on some improvements. You're going to, I really love what you've done. So originally with the version 1.0 release, each city that each faction had was all the same, right? You had this like kind of like perfunctory menu, and you were able to go through and build different buildings and, allow yourself to build new units through this, almost kind of like, I guess it's just, I guess the best way to describe it would be a menu. But now you have these beautiful pixel art backgrounds that show each of the faction cities and kind of, look very unique and bring to light and kind of bring to life these factions. So where are you headed from now? So I know that you're adding the last of the ones that you hadn't had before 2.0, but what else are you doing between now and 2.0 that will make the game better or kind of finish your vision of what Heroes Hour should be?
Not much, to be honest. It's kind of strange for me because as a person, the time I'm most excited about working on the game is when I'm adding something new. And for once, I actually have to limit myself from doing such, because right now it's the time for polishing, it's for bug fixing, it's for quality of life improvements, maybe some extra options for how you want to play the game. But the general gist is that there's not going to be a lot of change between now and version 2.0, apart from things that I specifically decide to not release to the public. For instance, the 11th faction is not going to be added before version 2.0, specifically because I decide not to. Everything else is going to be quite a smooth transition from now until then, which is sad, but it's also a very important part of the game development, I guess. This is where usually you would not hear a lot from the game developer because they were just out there doing the thing, finishing up everything. The thing that used to be so commonly known as the time for crunch time. Instead, I'm sitting here with a game that's already been released with a lot of people playing it, but I'm still needing to go through this period where everything is just a bit focused, a bit unexciting, as the case may be.
Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, I mean, like I guess for the most part, leading up to release, especially since you say end of winter, which for me at least sounds like a March-ish release date. But with that, I guess the end of the time where you get to a point where you're mostly feature complete and you've got a lot of content, you want to get things as smooth as possible, and as you said, kind of queue up on some quality of life things and stuff like that. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm really excited personally. I think the game is already a lot of fun, and I know that you have a strong passion for it, so it's really cool. I think, in fact, I believe it's almost probably one of the few times where I've really kind of followed an indie developer, and you're very good at hyping up your own game, which is extraordinarily unique. I think a lot of indie developers have a hard time with marketing, but you push things out on Twitter and through your social channels often enough that I'm like, oh yeah, Heroes Hour, this game is great, I need to go back to it. But the other thing is too, with the ongoing community thing that you've done, I think is a fantastic idea. The community faction contest of sorts, where you put out a vote. I think there's like 32 original ideas, right?
Right. So the community faction thing has been a thing I've been juggling around for a long while, and it's finally coming to pass. There's been two votes so far. The first vote was actually 38 different faction concepts that people were going to vote for. And I put myself the absurd task of actually making a sprite for every single faction too. That vote ended back this Friday with 5 winners moving on from the first round to the next round. So the round that's currently going on has just 5 factions, but each of them is more fleshed out with more ideas from the community. I'm already looking at the results now, and it's actually, I guess I shouldn't be doing that, but there's like 131 of them. And I kind of have the feeling that it's not going to change too much before the end. So I already kind of know which faction is going to be the one that's winning. But apart from just voting for the faction, it's also about voting for the different mechanics ideas. I'm going to try to do something a bit different than usual, because usually I have complete authorial control. And here I'm trying to make sure that the people's voices are being heard, that they get as far as possible. And everyone is very angry. because they started out with being 38 factions, and quite obviously, not everyone can win. So everyone has the favorite faction, which isn't going to come in. It's like democracy apparently just leaves everyone unhappy, and I hope in the end people are going to be excited for the winner. I'm quite excited, at least.
Yeah, that's funny. It's hilarious that you're trying to do something to engage the community, and it always seems to be the case, right? Like you're gonna make some people happy, but there's gonna be so many more people that are frustrated or angry that their particular choice or vote didn't make it. So for me personally, I had a feeling. I mean, I don't know, and just so that everyone is aware, I don't have any clue as to how the votes are going, but I have a feeling based on like the fervor and excitement that the frog faction might be up there, because there just seems to be a lot of people who seem to like frogs, which is cool. I like that. And the pixel art for the frog faction was really cute, so I think that's part of why it was getting a lot of the traction it did. But it seemed to be what a lot of people were voting for, so I won't be surprised if they're the ones that come out on top.
Then they've already lost. I'm very sorry to report this.
Oh no, I didn't know that. Oh no.
I think they're actually in the bottom. Yeah, and then in the bottom 10.
Man, you know what?
I'm really happy with the pixel art I made for that. It was basically a mix between a frog and a gorilla. It worked out really well, but I'm sorry.
That's all right. I just saw a lot of people on Twitter saying frogs, and I was like, oh, I guess they're gonna do well. Then it would probably the deep sea faction was another one that for me I was personally very excited about. I don't know why I've got this weird obsession with sea creatures and dolphins and whales. So deep sea would be cool to see, but I'm excited to see what ends up coming. I think that's a really good idea, and I it's a page out of some developers' books. I don't know if you're familiar with Amplitude Studios, but Amplitude Studios is very good at bringing their community in to vote on sometimes as big of things as like factions, and it seems to kind of be a marketing tool in and of itself because it's getting people engaged and getting people kind of invested in the game. So that's a great idea.
Right. I kind of from the start of it, I've tried to do as much community outreach as mentioned. My original vision for Heroes Hour didn't even include having any controlled combat at all, which has kind of left me humbled to see that I think my ideas are great. I also think my ideas in a vacuum are not particularly useful. I kind of need to get some feedback on them too. Things like, what's it called? Actually, how reinforcements work in the game are actually also the result of a vote that I did on Twitter back when I had like 100 followers and there was 30 people voting, and which are still influencing how the game works today.
Yeah, so no, this is really cool. Like I already enjoy what's there, and it feels like it already does feel like a complete game, as Rob was saying. And I actually was going to ask him whether there was a dolphin race that he wanted to be involved, because I knew that's something he'd go for.
I voted for it. I said something on Twitter. I wanted to see like a cetacean race, but I think that there was already 38 other ideas, and I don't think that I couldn't do that to Benjamin. I'm sure, and plus it'd be hard to kind of. I mean, it's a land-based game, so I feel like if you're like having like walking, talking whales and dolphins, it would be. I mean, you could do it. It'd be weird as hell, but you could do it.
Yeah, they could be like street sharks, but dolphins.
There you go.
There, nailed it. There, you can have that one for free.
Land sharks are very popular creatures, and they will also remind you about the Balaenopteron unit in the game, which is a whale with legs. It's nightmare fuel, and I love it. It's wonderful.
Yeah. So I know you've mentioned what you want to do in the lead up to the release on Steam. I don't know if this is sort of thinking too far ahead, but you mentioned that there was stuff that you wanted to put in but haven't yet, like to do with scope creep, I guess. Do you have like a sort of a top list of things that you do want to add that aren't in there yet?
I do. Kind of to contain myself within this whole realm of not actually being allowed to do features. I'm kind of slowly planning out ideas for a DLC eventually, I guess. Like one thing that's been kind of planned and never really implemented was a thing, basically neutral towns, like towns where instead of being of one faction or another, they're basically neutral towns with the unit setup being procedurally generated. So instead of there being like one or two neutral towns, there's actually like thousands, literally, which is something I do hope that I'm going to return to eventually when I have better time to test and implement that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, that sounds cool. I think that'd be really cool. It would fill out the game world a bit, but also give you maybe some challenges leading up to taking on other factions directly. So I think that's really cool. Looking forward to that. Well, I mean, is there anything else you want us to know about Hero Zero? I mean, like I like when we started this, you gave us a really good synopsis on what you would expect from Heroes Hour. And, I think basically calling it an homage to Heroes of Might and Magic, and but also with very clear and unique gameplay mechanics that make Heroes Hour unique in and of itself is a great way to describe it. And I think that anyone who watches it, in fact, if you want to, you can go and check out gameplay on our YouTube channel. In fact, this whole interview setup was an impetus for me to start recording more of it, so you guys can go check it out. But is there anything else you'd want anyone here that was listening to know about Heroes Hour before we wrap things up?
So the thing I usually tout about the Heroes Hour when people are asking about it is that, hey, you can just go and you can just pick it up. It has a free demo, and the free demo is quite generous. Like, that's what people tell me. It has 4 out of the 10 factions, and apart from that, it has like all the gameplay. You can easily sink plenty of hours into that if you're not sure if it's worth your money. So that's my advice. You can just, if you're curious, you can have a try. If you like it, I'm looking forward to maybe meeting you in the community.
Yeah, I will say for me, the demo immediately sold me. I played like 10 turns and turned around and just bought it. I was like, this is, first of all, the price point is amazing. But secondly, I just could see the amount of love and passion just oozing through the game that I mean, it was dumb. I know this is so dumb, and I know that you're going to be like, wow, it's the little things, right? But one of the details that really stuck to me was that once I went and I think I claimed a crystal mine or something, and the little mine carts started coming back to my town, and it was just such a cute little addition, such a it was just something that had so much personality immediately, just to see these little mine carts making their way back to my town. And I was like, oh wow, that's adorable. And then I got into the battles, and like Shaun said, things were just, they were hectic enough and crazy enough that I was kind of laughing, chuckling. And it's very, very infrequent that I'm having such a good time with a game that I'm chuckling to myself. So for me, I really, really want to see Heroes Hour succeed. I hope that, it's the best for you, that the Steam release ends up being all that you want it to be. And, for our part, we're going to be watching you, and we'll have, videos and everything else that we can do to help you out. But I mean, Benjamin, it was really great to get to know you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about Heroes Hour with us.
And I'm very happy to have you, and also the interesting questions. I'm always happy when I get to not just talk about my game, but also talk about procedural generation. So thank you so much for that. Nice to meet you too.
Yeah, no, it is really nice to talk to you. And I know Rob mentioned Heroes Hour a while ago, and I didn't really follow it that much, but then I watched his video, and that sucked me right in. And then I just went, all right, I have to play this. And like he was saying, the thing with the carts, I do really like that. All the little animations, like those little touches, they really make it. They really make the game. And I guess you take it quite literally now when you say that procedural generation is life.
It is his life for sure.
I wouldn't be here without it.
That's awesome. Great stuff. Benjamin, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it, and best of luck to you.
Thank you, and you too.
This was Rob, Shaun, and Benjamin for Explorminates. Until next time, keep exploring.